Now I'm hoping that it comes through the right system. Otherwise, we're in really big trouble. There we go. Let's go to here. Let's move this out of the way. Jaclyn Paul, you are muted. And we cannot. You are unmuted.
Hello.
Hello. We cannot see you. I do.
There she is. Hey.
It's so nice to meet you. I really feel like I know you because of this. This has changed my life, Jaclyn. It's incredible. And I've been reading little bits from it, and I've highlighted bits when I was reading it. It's such a great book. This started because you had a blog, is that right?
Yeah, that was the start of it all, was the blog. And it kind of grew out of that. Interestingly, now most people find me through the book and then realize I also have a blog. But it started out the other way around.
When I'm recent ADHD diagnosis, like maybe in the last 3 or 4 months, and when I was told I was bipolar and ADHD at the same time, and I know there's kind of some crossover, and I started reading about it, what ADHD was. Yeah. And I kept phoning Catherine.
I would get phone calls. I need to read you my, what do you call it? Instruction manual.
Oh my God, it explained so much. Mm-hmm. It explained so much. Can I ask, when did you realize that you were ADHD?
Oh boy. It's sort of a 2-tiered process, I guess. I think the original suspicion on my part happened a little bit earlier on than I maybe talk about in the book. That when I was in the 9th grade, I had a boyfriend who had an ADHD diagnosis and took Adderall or something for it. And some of the things that he told me about it sounded very familiar. And I was like, this is in the somewhat early days of the internet also. So I did a little bit of research on my own, and I talked to my school guidance counselor, and I did like a little assessment in a psychologist's office that was like it was on the computer. It was like an ADHD torture device where it was 20 minutes long, and it either showed the number 1 or 2 on the screen, or a voice said the number 1 or 2, and you had to like click the mouse every time you either heard or saw the number 2.
Right.
and it produced this little bar graph for the evaluator that showed, how attentive you were able to be to this task, which I was not much. But then she said, well, do you want to address this medically? And I was like, oh, I don't know. And at that point, to do some sort of evaluation through the school would have required me to get my parents and teachers to fill out a questionnaire. And I think I sort of masked my struggles to the level where I was like, well, I can't talk to them about this. This is like something that they don't know anything about. Yeah. So I won't involve them. But then later on, after I had gotten out into the real world, as it were, I struggled a lot more also because school provided a helpful structure. And so when I had to mind my own home and office job and that kind of thing, I no longer had the structure of academia and a very harried retail service job that sort of kept the adrenaline going. That's when I was like, oh no, I need to learn more about this and really revisit it. So I knew like that I can trace back to about maybe when I first entered school at all. There were some enormous red flags that I did not know were such at the time.
And when I did the test with my psychiatrist, and of course I didn't do it for like 3 or 4 months. It's just sat there. And then I did it. I ticked almost every box. There were 3 boxes I didn't tick. And I sent it to him and went, okay, well this looks like something.
But before that, we did one from the internet, didn't we? And you got me to do it as well.
We did a few from the internet, 30 questions. And I would get like 28 or 29. And I said to Catherine, but those tests are worded so that everyone gets 28 or 29. So you sign up to whatever they're selling.
Yeah.
And you did one.
Yeah.
And you got 4 in the test. But getting the diagnosis, and it suddenly it all made sense. And I read your book, and I read a couple of other books that detailed some of the characteristics and things that I thought were me being naughty, or me being thick, or
you being weird.
Me being weird were real things. The two big ones that got me was quite often, and this doesn't apply to everyone. So if you're watching this and this doesn't resonate with you, well then keep listening, because something else might. Quite often people with ADHD are unable to remember faces or names. And I read that, and Catherine, or when I was married, my wife I'd have to go as someone approached, do I know them? Yeah, that's Steve.
Or I would point someone out and say, you spoke to them, remember?
And I had to modify my language, coping mechanisms, because the number of times I said to people, oh, it's so nice to meet you. And they'd say, well, we worked together for a year. Oh, right. So now my greeting is, we've met, haven't we? I go in like that. And the other one, and this was a big joke between us, if I'm in a party and someone is talking to me, I cannot hear them. I cannot. It just turns into this one noise, and we would joke about it.
Yeah, because we go out to eat or something, and we'll be talking, and I just see him glaze over, and he's, I can't hear you. I can't hear what you're saying.
And of course, some people think that's rudeness. You're not paying attention. You're not listening. I'd really concentrate, and I'd look at the lips. And then I read in a book that is sometimes, symptom is the wrong word because it's not disease, but that is sometimes one of the things. And of course, it's all different. And and if I ask anything that's too personal, please just tell me, because I don't mean to. I'm just excited to talk to you. Can I ask, what are some of your key ADHD traits that are part of you, that impact on your life?
So for me, I had the organizational challenges I talk about in the book, but I also had, throughout my life, when I was in younger elementary school, I had a lot of behavioral problems that teachers would say I needed. One of my favorite was that I needed to learn how to work democratically in a group.
Oh gosh!
But there was all this social nuance that I did not understand. I had a lot of friendships that ended, and to me, it felt like one day I was best friends with someone, and then the next day they were a sworn enemy. I had no idea what happened. And some of those I still have no idea. But I did have problems with sort of impulsive behavior in social situations. And so growing up, my friends were all boys, because the boys were more rough and tumble and less about the social nuance, on the whole. That's a huge generalization that is not true for everyone. But for the most part, my close friends had always been boys. But even so, that the boyfriend I talked about with the ADD, I remember there was this time that he was like leaning against the lockers in the hallway, and I just kicked his feet out from under him, and he fell on his butt, and he was like, "Why would you do that? That hurt." I was like, "I don't know. It just happened." But I had a lot of things I would get in trouble.
Do you remember?
I did kick a stool out from under you, because it just happened. You remind me, Jaclyn. And by the way, if you see me typing, I'm just posting your links in the chat, and we're going to keep posting them, and you've got them on the screen. And we'll talk about the talks you've got coming up. I did a reality TV show over here where we all had to live in a jungle for 3 weeks, and I got dropped in 5 days in, so everyone else had been there for a week. And I was very nervous, and I came out, and everyone was there. And the first thing I said was, "Oh my God, you all look like shit." That's the first thing I've said to 20 people that I'm going to have to live with. "Oh my God, you all look like shit."
20
and their faces.
Vain celebrities who are already a bit worried that their mask might be slipping. And he
their
says
faces.
That.
And as soon as I said it, I thought, who said that? Where did that come from? But it was the first
and that set the tone for them, didn't it?
They hated me. They hated me as a result. But similar to that thing with the boy, it just happened.
It just happened. And the thing is, those first impressions, though, it's, my husband told me fairly recently, considering how long we've known each other, that he assumed when he first met me in college that I already had a bunch of friends and I was kind of a little superior. Like I didn't need the social group that I was part of with him. And I was like, oh no, I had nothing going on. I just didn't know how to speak to people. So I was usually just at my computer, sort of adjacent to the group. But, but it's, my growing up, my dad used to actually say who said that. He says it, but it's like he would say something he knew was offensive and then turn around and go, oh, who said that? It was kind of facetious, but it does sort of belie a way that we have of saying the thing that we're maybe thinking before considering is is this something that I A, should say at all, or B, maybe it should phrase in this way.
I'm reminded of I had a friend, Matt Allwright, and he's not a friend anymore. And I was going, but what did I do? Well, I said something rude to him on Twitter,
where there's no nuance anyway.
Where there's no nuance, as a joke, and he took it as he was deeply offended by it. Now, of course, if I'd thought about it, I wouldn't have said it, but I just went, doesn't talk to me anymore. And it's that impulsivity, which I think has helped my career. It's also hindered my career and held me back, because I will say stuff. I'm getting better. How are you now with the impulsivity? Do you have some kind of filter in place?
I probably a lot better than I used to, but I definitely, before going, I have a lot of social anxiety, and like before going into a group social situation, I still like, okay, I'm going to do that thing that you're supposed to do where you wait for 3-4 chances to speak to pass before you interrupt. And I very rarely succeed at that. But then, afterward, I'll also, because my memory sort of gaps out a lot, after a social gathering, it's like, oh, I hope I didn't say anything offensive. And it's, I find, I don't know if you find this, but do you gravitate to people who are of a similar disposition? Because if I'm around people who are all very nice, that's a little bit uncomfortable sometimes, because I'm like, I don't know what exactly they're thinking, and I'm going to forget to look at their faces and try to figure out what they're thinking by their faces. But the people who just blurt out whatever it is that they're feeling without worrying about hurting my feelings are actually maybe my favorite sorts, because it's, then I know. If I know I always know, then
what I'm having to do now is I'm really having to pay attention to you and not think of the next thing that I'm going to say. And of course, I thought that while you were saying that. That's another thing is, okay, someone's speaking. What am I going to say next? Oh, it's my turn. That's a real big
and
thing.
People can see that, and it looks like you've lost interest.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense, actually, once you know.
Does
this is what it is.
I'm doing it now.
What you were saying about gravitating towards people that you don't have to use the filter so much. We were talking about that the other day when you said that I make your ADHD bouncier or something.
Oh, you make it bouncier. Having got the diagnosis, and I'm not on medication yet. We tried one, but we're kind of focusing on the bipolar and getting that steady. And I'm really keen to try medication. We tried one, Zagatin, which I think is kind of a Ritalin sort of derivative. I'm not sure. Going off on a tangent, and I can't remember what I was going to say.
No, but at the moment you're trying to find out
I'm feeling
what it is. Yeah,
I'm feeling it now. I know what it is. I'm trying to feel it, and I'm trying to, when it's appropriate, let it go, not hold it back, and just see what happens. My kids find it hilarious that I'll just be in the car going off on like 1,000 tangents at once and doing voices and singing songs and going, oh, do you remember when we did that when you were 4 years old? And I'm kind of enjoying that release now. I know what it is, but I am looking forward to.
In the early stages, though, you did find it bloody exhausting.
Oh yeah.
Because you were conscious of what it was and you were identifying it all the time. And you said to me, it's exhausting.
This book is great, by the way, and I thoroughly recommend this to anyone. We've got a lot of people in the chat who've been diagnosed, a lot who haven't. How easy is it to get diagnosed over there? Because here, it's lousy. On the NHS, it's like a 12 to 18 month waiting list. You can do it privately, but it's anywhere between £500 and £5,000, and the medication is not guaranteed on the NHS. It depends where you live if you'll get medication or not. How difficult or easy is it for you to get a diagnosis over there?
Well, you may have heard our healthcare system has a few of its own foibles. So it honestly does really depend on your situation and your level of access, which is unfortunate. I'm not sure if I say this in the book, but I do have a blog post about it, that what I did was actually a lot of employers here have something called an employee assistance program, which you're entitled to something like 6, it's going way back to my days as a human resources administrator, but you have something like 6 free mental health consultations that you can call, and it covers you and like your whole household. So even your roommates can use it, but a lot of people don't know that this exists. Anyway, so I just called their hotline thing and I said, look, I've allowed my life to disintegrate to a point where it's unbearable. Like, I really need to do something about it now. Because that's the thing with the 12 to 18 month wait, when you have people who often don't get around to calling for help until it's a dire situation. So that's not great. But I did get in to talk to someone, and then they just referred me back to my just primary care doctor, who, for better or worse, she said, we'll just try you on some of the common medications and see how you respond to them. And that may give us some clues also, but you meet the criteria. Some people go through a whole formal assessment with a psychiatrist, some do not. I do not. There are some really great, I actually, near where I live is like the nationally known ADHD center that focuses on care for women with ADHD, but they don't take insurance, so you pay $2,000 out of pocket and then hope that you might get reimbursed some of it. So sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not, and especially if you have sort of a non-standard presentation, that they might try to label it as something else, or if you have a doctor who's doubtful, then some people have a lot of trouble getting diagnosed, and then it's a matter of your insurance, again, getting the medication is sometimes a little spotty.
A personal question you may want to avoid: Are you on meds, and if so, what do they do? Because I tried this med and it didn't really do it did nothing for me, basically. And you kind of have to, in this country, you have to start with this one to show that you've started here, and then you go to different ones. What does it do?
So for me, and I took notes at first because, sometimes you don't notice all the things that it does. And so I remember my notes that I took like the first week. The big thing I noticed is my perception of time.
Right.
That there was, first of all, there was this big time that appeared between when I felt or thought something and when I acted it out. And I was like, oh, this is the time in which people were telling me that I needed to consider my words and my actions before doing them. And I never understood how others did that. And then suddenly that time was actually there, which was an interesting experience. But also I had, at that time, just coincidentally, a pretty challenging week at work. And I remember it being Friday and I thought, it's just a week, like it's only a week long, and Monday we'll start again and it's fine. As opposed to how I'm feeling now is how I've always felt and how I always will feel. And this one time is all that exists. And, it's either all good or all bad, which is, the term time blindness is passing out of favor in a lot of circles, especially on social media. But it is, Russell Barkley has a whole talk on YouTube about ADHD is time blindness, I think is the title, but he talks about this nearsightedness to time.
Taking notes, because this is good stuff for you to go and look at.
That, not only is it like, if you have to get ready to go somewhere and you're finishing something up and you're like, well, I'll stand up and go get ready to go, like not this minute, but like, I'm just one more thing. And then it keeps snowballing. But also it has that emotional component of, when we're feeling something, we're feeling it often very strongly and not perceiving anything outside of that, which is charming when it's a good feeling. When it's a bad feeling, not entirely so much. But for me, that perception of time really changed, and the ability to like feel something, I'm reacting to something internally, and acknowledge that without it sort of being a wave that takes over everything.
Yeah. What is
That's
great about
very
the book isn't like it's not a diagnosis book. It's got some, you know, it lists, it doesn't list. You write about traits and things that you noticed, and I've highlighted loads of bits. I live in constant fear of being found out by people who have me in high regard. I always felt others' trust in me was misplaced. Non-stop anxiety, struggle to create a social life. So there's stuff like that. But what is great about this, Order from Chaos, and we'll put the links again in the chat, is you give tools for how to kind of fit into a non-ADHD world and how to be slightly more productive and more focused. And I'm reminded of that because I've got a whiteboard here now because of you. You know, I have a whiteboard. So when I'm doing the show, when I'm sat here working and I think, oh God, I've got to get that thing for the kids. Instead of diving straight into getting that thing for the kids, I can write it down and go, okay, that's that. It worked so well. I've got a whiteboard in the kitchen so that if I'm in there, an idea comes up, I haven't got to go and get my phone out and go online or sit at the desk. I can write it down. You do, I use the diary on my phone. Oh my God, I used to remember everything. I've got a meeting on Wednesday at 2, and I've got the dentist on Thursday, that's at 5. Oh no, hang on, is it the dentist or is it the thing? Of course, it was chaos. And the number of times I'd get a phone call saying, are you coming for your appointment? Or, you know, I'd turn up a day early. I'm using the diary on the phone, which seems like such a simple thing, but it never, and I'm color coding things. And there's loads of suggestions in there like that. The one that really got me, and you'll correct me if I've got it slightly wrong, and I started it and I'm struggling with it. You posted on Instagram about if there is something on your shelves that you need to move to get to other things or to dust, you're getting rid of it. Have I got that right?
Yeah, I mean, not obviously things that are, you know, prized possessions. But I think it is common for people in general to keep things in their homes that are sort of decorative or whatever. My go-to example sometimes is a plant stand, even though I have, you know, plants all over everything else. But if a shelf is a good example, if it's too full of stuff, I won't dust it, and then it'll, you know, the dust will accumulate, and then I'll feel badly about it, and you know, this angst is happening. I'm mad about the dust, and it would take 2 minutes to dust it, but I'm not because I have to move those 3 things. I do really evaluate: is this something that I need to have here? And I have gotten rid of things because I don't enjoy them enough to offset the cost of having to manage, you know, like the physical management of just having a thing that you have to maintain and clean around. I'm big on simplifying for, you know, make it easier to do. Don't learn how to try harder to do the thing, because
make it easier.
You know, make the thing.
And I started that. These shelves were a mess, and I read your book, and I got rid of so much stuff. It's just starting to build back up again. I'll put this on this. It's just starting to build back up.
But I remember that when you read that and you went, I've got too much stuff.
Yeah.
I've got too much stuff. It's starting to sort of, the walls are coming in. It's like,
yeah.
Get rid.
What do you think? Because you've known me before the diagnosis. I'm guessing the diagnosis was not a surprise.
No, but I don't know about these things. But the more you show me in these books, highlighted sections where it could be written about you, the more I think it was flipping obvious. And why did we not spot it before? But why did your teachers not spot it before? Why were you allowed to think that you were somehow not a kid who could, a disruptive kid or a?
I was at school in the 80s, and no one knew what it was then. It was naughtiness, and also, I kind of do think it's not. I kind of think it's not necessarily the schools. They're there to teach, and they can't go, oh, this kid, you know.
But they do now.
They do now, but it was the 80s, and no one knew about it. And, you know, I remember we both have presented phone-in shows, Jaclyn, sort of from the late 90s onwards. And even in the early 2000s, I remember Nick Ferrari doing it. You get phone-ins. There's no such thing as ADHD.
Just naughty
it's
children.
just naughty kids.
Yeah.
What should we do with these naughty kids?
Yeah.
Do we suspend them? Do we expel them? Do we smack them? What do we do?
Yeah.
And that was going on in the last 15 years. There's no such thing.
Because the popular, perception was you're just sedating naughty kids rather than dealing with bad parenting.
Yeah.
I remember people having that conversation and being absolutely convinced they were right. None of them, of course, being parents of kids with ADHD.
How did you
Well,
write a
people
book?
still say that.
Yeah.
They do. I've had people say too, oh, well, we don't believe in labeling and all that stuff. And I always sort of have to look at where they're coming from, because I had someone say that to me who was a parent of kids with ADHD, but they had tremendous resources to send them to private school and get them tutored and just oodles of money. And I was like, well, okay, you've given yourself a lot of privilege to say that you don't need the label, but for the vast majority of the world, I mean, a lot of people are very thankful for the label and the knowledge about it and knowing there's something they could do.
And
you were relieved, weren't you?
Oh, I phoned you up singing. I've got ADHD. Because it explains so much. And you still have to be careful with GPs over here. If you get, there's a lot of them that still don't believe it. You know, the actual doctors don't believe that this is a thing.
Yeah. And,
or they'll prescribe antidepressants for, there is a
which makes it worse.
Well, yeah, there's a correlation between depression and ADHD. There can be also a correlation between addiction. I'm a recovering cocaine addict, and my psychiatrist, when we're talking about meds, and a lot of them are amphetamine based, so we're treading very carefully. And he said, when you first started taking cocaine, what did it do for you? At the end, it was a mess, but what did it do for you? And I said, well, when I remember the first few times I took it, I was really focused, and I could get knuckled down, and I could do stuff, and it made me laser kind of focus. And then, of course, it went out of hand and became awful. And he said that's quite often people who are ADHD will turn to something like that, subconsciously or consciously, whatever, because it works. It works for a bit. And then it stops working. You can't continue taking cocaine, unfortunately. How did you write a book? Because that to me seems, this is a big, brilliant, thick book. How did you do this?
Well, so I, the same way that I escaped any suspicion from people surrounding me of having ADHD in my childhood, I am a linguistic thinker. I've always been a writer, and I found it easier to express my thoughts in writing than in speech, which actually my next book is going to be much more sort of a memoir about friendships and whatnot. And I just was writing this chapter about how one of the many times that writing my feelings out instead of saying them got me into trouble, because I gave a letter to a classmate with things that were, as I was informed later, very hurtful when put in writing, but defensible if I had just said them in a way that could be forgotten. But so it's just my brain works very linguistically, which goes against the stereotype of ADHD making us very visual and spatially creative. I definitely met a lot of people like that, just not me. But it also meant that I could sort of coast along academically and get the "you're too smart" to have a problem. But yeah, so writing has always been sort of what I do as a creative outlet, and that's so yeah. Reading and writing are a challenge for a lot of people with ADHD who maybe are more visually oriented, but for me, it's my sort of hyper focus outlet is books. So
funny, I do like reading, but I've just got a Kindle for the first time. So suddenly I'm carrying around 60 books in my hand. Oh, geez. I'd read 2 pages of one and go, I'm bored. And I've got like 6, 7, 8 books on the go now because of this, and it's wonderful, but it's kind of tough. How there are so many different things in here: folders, keeping tables clear, putting things away, magazines in kind of boxes and or magazine racks, and if you've not read them after 3 months, then getting rid of them. All of those kind of things. How did you come up with them? Was that just trial and error?
Some of it was trial and error. Some of it is, I think, where I've gotten things from other sources. I do cite them in there. But yeah, it was a lot of trial and error, and then sort of extrapolating from, my whole thing with containers and what can that do. You keeping something safe, like with the whiteboard, that's a container where you can keep things safe and not be anxious about forgetting that idea before you can get to it. But once I recognized that the sort of physical surroundings influenced my ability to focus significantly, then I started looking for, if you have the teetering stack of magazines, that sort of doesn't feel very good, as opposed to if they're just the same stack in a little bin that also kind of self-limits when it gets over the top of the bin. I'm like, okay, I need to confess to myself that I'm not, like, the New Yorker is a weekly magazine, and I cannot read every single word of every one. Then I give them away. But yeah, a lot of it was trial and error. And so a lot of this sharing my story was just, here's what works for me, and here's how I arrived at it, because I think there are also a lot of prescriptive solutions out there. We all operate differently, and different things will work. So really, it's a matter of getting to know yourself.
And that's great. And there are some things in there I haven't done, because I think there's a couple of things I've tried that haven't worked. I downloaded, I think it's Todoist, which is an app that helps you keep a track of things. And I did it for a week, and it didn't work for me. I think one of the greatest things in here is differentiating between tasks and projects. A task is
that's a big one.
One thing. A project is a series of tasks. Oh my God. When I saw that, it was just, I'm one for writing lists, and I used to write a list in bed of what I needed to do the next day. But I would put down a project that had to be done as one thing. When you break it down into tasks, my God, it's so much easier.
Yeah.
That's just beautiful, that one. And that's a really simple one that anyone can do.
It's the reason that a lot of things don't get done. Usually when I'm struggling to get something done, it's because I've tried to just shortcut it and put the one thing on the list when it really needs to be, because our working memory is often really faulty. So it's that part of your brain that allows you to have like more than one thing in there at a time and think of everything together. We are not as strong on that. And so I need to do it on paper. And if I've written down something like, there's a recall out on the car, get the service work done. If I write that on the list as one thing, it's like, that's never, ever going to happen, because it's actually, 6 things that need to happen to get that done. And I just can't hold it all in my head when I see that one.
Tim in the chat is by the way, everyone in the chat is loving this. Let me post the link again. Tim is